Welcome everybody to the Luke Beasley Show. What a day we have for you in store. Holy smokes. Maybe too much to go through, frankly. Just ending was the January 6th hearings. I did not have the ability to cover them live for a number of different reasons. One of them was I was did round trip 2 hours today on the road, and that was in addition to my day job. And so luckily though, because I wasn't covering it and I was in the car, I was able to listen, take notes on what I wanted to cover, and somehow, by some miracle, prepped today's show during the drive, sort of, and then when I got back. And we're going to get to go through all of it. I mean, it just, an hour ago ended, and we're going to get to go through all of the high points of this January 6th hearing, which was huge. I'm so pumped to discuss it. It was groundbreaking in many ways, and it's going to be a lot. In addition to that, we will be discussing Fox News' reaction live as this was going on to the revelations coming out of the January 6th hearings. This is, of course, the 7th hearing. And then we'll be talking about how Democrats are doing better in the polls and may have some chance, some fighting chance in the 2022 midterms, which previously was not the case. And finally, we'll be discussing Josh Hawley getting absolutely destroyed by a professor during a hearing, presumably about abortion rights, but it became about who's able to get pregnant. Of course, anytime you are inclusive and recognize that while the primary group of people that get pregnant are women, there are also trans men and non-binary people who get pregnant as well. And Josh Hawley did what we've seen many conservatives do, which is pretend like you don't know what the heck that means. And the professor who was getting interviewed, who was testifying, really did a great job of pushing back against that ideology. So we're going to be going through all of that. I'm super pumped. To any of my people who watch the post show every day and enjoy kind of the longer form content that I do after the news segments, I will have to cut off early today. And so I'll just be doing the news, go through all the big stuff. It's going to be a rather long, not rather long, it could go sort of long, the news portion, but then we won't be doing any post show today because I have something this evening. But as I've committed to y'all, I won't miss the actual news today, especially a day like today. I think sometime last week I said it was the biggest show we've had as far as content to go through, but today is definitely the biggest that we've done. Ever since I've switched over to this live show format, today is definitely the most we have to go through. So I'm super pumped. It ended not too long ago, the hearing, but somehow y'all be shocked. I got all the clips prepped and all the stuff I want to go over. By some miracle, I was mad dashing. Again, I was driving and listening, and then when something notable would happen, I would start screen recording, and then I uploaded it all on this drive. Was being safe, of course, and got it all ready for y'all. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into the first story about the January 6th hearings. We're going to be doing two stories about the hearing specifically, and then one story about Fox News' reaction to it. So lots of hearing stuff today, but it's very important. The January 6th Select Committee held their 7th public hearing, where they went over a lot more groundbreaking information. Some stuff we've heard already, some stuff we haven't. And one of the highlights of it was that Trump's White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, who was obviously very close to Trump, would give legal advice to him as his White House legal counsel. He did pre-recorded interviews. I think it was something like 7 hours of interviews, and they debuted those clips, how he felt in the build-up to January 6th about Trump's plot to overturn the election and all those things during this hearing. Usually the past hearings have had kind of one big main topic that they're trying to address. during the hearing. This was not like this. This what kind of jumped all around to different points. And so that's going to have to be how I cover it, is just here's a bunch of different stuff. It's all important and you need to be aware of it all. So we have so much to go through. Bear with me, tons of clips to go over. But it's all so important. So I want to make sure you don't miss it at all, miss any of it. So first, as I mentioned, Pat Cipollone, White House legal counsel to Donald Trump, established how many close people to Trump, how many of his allies, how many of the people who were advising him made it clear that his theories were not based on evidence and he should not be acting in the way that he was to overturn the election results. So we'll look at a few clips of Pat Cipollone admitting that's how he felt.
If you agree, Mr. Cipollone, with the conclusions of Matt Morgan and Bill Barr, of all of the individuals who evaluated those claims, that there is no evidence of election fraud sufficient to undermine the outcome in a particular state.
So I can't do much about the audio of some of these clips, super bad on the part of the hearing, but I will read out a little bit whenever I feel like y'all can't hear it. So he just asked, based on the analysis of other people, including William Barr, election wasn't stolen, these claims were false. Do you agree with that? And Pat Cipollone is just now saying yes.
Yes, I agree with that.
So why do they keep beating this drum of let's show you all of these people close to Trump who refuted his claims and don't believe it now, but also claim that they didn't believe those theories back then? Well, the reason is if they can prove that Trump in any reasonable world should have realized his claims were false, but he kept saying them, he kept perpetuating those lies, then he may be more morally responsible and more possibly criminally responsible if it can be proven he wasn't just also misled by this false information. So here's another example.
On a broader scale, a bad idea for the country.
Have the federal government.
Right here, they're going over Sidney Powell's idea of the federal government seizing voting machines, seizing local voting machines in an attempt to prove fraud. And he's asked, did you think this was a good idea? Or you said that you thought it was dangerous. Why?
Seize voting machines. That's a terrible idea for the country. That's not how we do things in the United States. There's no legal authority to do that. And there is a way to contest elections, that happens all the time. But the idea that the federal government could come in and seize election machines, that's I don't understand why we even have to tell you why that's a bad idea. It's a terrible idea.
I agree with that. The way that he said you are able to challenge elections is, of course, through our judicial system, which the Trump team attempted to do and failed because there was no evidence.
Appointed one of the...
Apologies. And the last example with Pat Cipollone of him not subscribing to these ideas, this was Trump's legal counsel next to Trump each step of the way. But at that time, he wasn't even on board, showing that Trump should have been aware himself that he shouldn't be perpetuating these lies. That's the idea of sharing all of these clips from his testimony.
My view is that the vice president didn't have the legal authority to do anything except what he did.
They both told us, Mr. Philbin and Mr. Jacob, that they looked very closely at the Eastman memos, the Eastman theory, and thought that it had no basis, that it was not a strategy that the president should pursue. It sounds like that's consistent with your impression as well.
My impression would have been informed certainly by them.
So he agrees with the sentiment of Vice President Mike Pence had no authority to reject the election results, send it back to the states, and attempt to keep Trump in power unlawfully. So again, even though it seems a little weird, okay, great, people near Trump didn't believe his claims. Why does that matter? Well, the reason is a defense of Trump could be, hey, he was misled like all these other people in the country. Why are you blaming him for saying lies if he didn't know they were lies? So what they're trying to prove is look at all these people close to Trump who clearly knew at the time that these were lies, expressed that sentiment to Trump, and he didn't care. Next thing, a quick funny sort of, all of this is sad, but also a little bit funny. The Speaker of the House in Arizona, who interacted with Giuliani, confirms that at one point Rudy Giuliani said, "We have a lot of theories, but no evidence."
At one point, did one of them make a comment that they didn't have evidence, but they had a lot of theories?
That was Mr. Giuliani.
So Rudy Giuliani, who's going around being one of the leaders of this effort to overturn the election results and claiming confidently that the election was stolen, says to the Arizona Speaker of the House, because he's trying to get the Arizona Speaker of the House to be on board with this and reject the election results, he says to that guy, "Listen, we don't have a lot of evidence, but we got a lot of theories." Okay, well, that doesn't do you any good, and that proves you knew there was no substance to the things you were saying. We will get to a story later in a different segment that was super fascinating about how there was this heated White House meeting between the more reasonable Trump aides and the less reasonable, the Sidney Powells, the Michael Flynn's. So we will cover that in a future story because it's a whole thing of its own. But in the kind of chronological order of this hearing, that was then laid out, as we'll discuss later. But we'll skip over that for this story. They did a lot of coverage over how Trump's tweets affected these different radical groups, and they dove into just how deeply disgusting many of these radical right-wing white supremacist groups' intentions were for that day, and how there was all this chatter when Trump said, "Be there on January 6th, is going to be wild," and all the other claims he was making, all the other encouragements for people to come up to Washington that he was putting out there, and showing how directly they even interviewed someone at Twitter. You would just see this spiral out of control after he would make those statements of these radical groups starting to prepare very specifically, calling for bloodshed, calling for the mass murder of Democrats and the attack of Washington, and all these things that would happen right as Trump would make statements to his audience. The radical elements of his audience would then begin planning for January 6th. And so they did a lot of diving into the reality of that in the build up to January 6th. That was super fascinating. No notable clips to show from that, but that's kind of the summary. Another impactful moment was they read text messages between Brad Parscale, former Trump campaign manager, and someone else who was discussing after January 6th with Brad Parscale how he felt, and he admitted that the blood's on Trump's hands. This is Trump's fault. I don't know how Trump is living with it. Crazy stuff.
Mr. Parscale said, quote, "This is about Trump pushing for uncertainty in our country, a sitting president asking for civil war." And then when he said, "This week I feel guilty for helping him win," Katrina Pearson responded, "You did what you felt right at the time, and therefore it was right." Mr. Parscale added, "Yeah, but a woman is dead. And yeah, if I was Trump and I knew my rhetoric killed someone." When Ms. Pearson replied, "It wasn't the rhetoric," Mr. Parscale said, "Katrina, yes, it was." Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
So Trump's former campaign manager, someone who is very intimately close with him for much of Trump's campaign and the build-up to what he eventually became politically, saw as clear as daylight, as we all did, that this is on Trump's hands, this is Trump's fault, and how could anyone live with that and continue to tell the lies that led to that destruction? Next, they brought a witness live who was a former Oath Keeper, and he shed light on how dangerous these radical right-wing white supremacist organizations are that look up to Trump. And so in this clip, he talks about what caused him to leave the organization. And the reason I'm playing is it just shows you guys there is some dangerous, terrible ideology out there. And it very largely is on that far right part of our country that looks up to Trump.
There came a point, there were many
This was him describing why he left the Oath Keepers.
red flags, and I probably should have broke with them much earlier than I did. But the straw that broke the camel's back really came when I walked into a grocery store. We were living up in the very remote town of Eureka, Montana, and there was a group of core members of the group of the Oath Keepers and some associates, and they were having a conversation at that public area where they were talking about how the Holocaust was not real. And that was, for me, something I just could not abide. And, you know, we were not wealthy people at all. We were barely surviving, and it didn't matter. I went home to my wife and my kids, and I told them that I've got to walk away at this point. I don't know how we're going to survive or where we're going to go or what we're going to do, but I just can no longer continue, and put in my resignation.
A group that denies the Holocaust is one of the groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, that they're highlighting that very much had a premeditated effort to attack the Capitol and wanted to act as Trump's private military who could allow him to stay in power. Scary, scary stuff. The same witness was then asked if he still, excuse me. No. Let's see. They then brought another witness who stormed the Capitol himself. He was charged for storming the Capitol, video evidence of it. And he's now changed his view on all this, and he describes what brought him to the Capitol and why he believed these theories.
I was, pretty hardcore into the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I followed, President Trump, on all of the websites, He basically put out, come to Stop the Steal rally, and I felt like I needed to be down here.
A little bit sad. He's in these right-wing social media spaces, he's following Trump, and because of it, he was so deluded that he thought he was doing some patriotic thing by attacking the Capitol, and now he's paying the price, and Trump is not yet paying the price. The same witness then asked if he still believed the election was stolen, and again, a little sad, honestly, because he says he doesn't believe it anymore, but when describing why, it's like he goes through what we all were able to do instantly when these claims were made, which is just analyze the facts of the situation and go, okay, clearly these are false claims being made. And it's great that he now was able to do that, but a little bit sad that you can be so brainwashed by the media echo chambers that you're in, that it takes you being arrested and charged and forced to stop consuming that media before you're able to critically think in that way.
And do you still believe the election was stolen?
Not so much now. I got away from all the social media when January 6th happened. Basically deleted it all. I started doing my own research and everything, and for me, for something like that to actually take place, it's too big. There's no way you can keep something like that quiet, as big as something like that. With all the lawsuits being shot down one after another, that was mainly what convinced me.
Next, that same witness was asked originally, were you planning on going to the Capitol from the beginning? And he said, no, I was just going to see Trump's speech. So then he was asked a follow-up, as you'll see here, which was, then why'd you go? And this was his answer.
So why'd you decide to march to the Capitol?
Well, basically, the president, got everybody riled up, told everybody to head on down. So we basically were just following what he said.
Guys, so sad and horrible that Trump would do this to so many people. Of course, they're responsible for their actions, absolutely, and I'm happy he's being held criminally responsible, this guy, but it is sad in a way that people are able to be brainwashed, as I said, by both Trump and right-wing media to believe just false things that lead them to storming the Capitol. And another thing is makes clear that at least some of the audience there wouldn't have stormed the Capitol. They weren't planning on it if it wasn't for Trump's speech that day. Finally, on this guy, he was asked, "Why did you leave the Capitol?" Fascinating response.
That afternoon, and then left the Capitol area later on. What made you decide to leave?
Basically, when President Trump put his tweet out, we literally left right after that come out. You know, to me, if he would have done that earlier in the day, 1:30, we wouldn't be in this. Maybe we wouldn't be in this bad of a situation or something.
Thank you.
And he's exactly right. He's laying out there. If Trump had sent out that tweet earlier, many people like him would have left. They were just following what they felt like were orders from him. Again, not justified. Still bad that they did it. They should still be held criminally responsible. All those things. But it proves the point that Trump had the power to call off the people on that day, as we all are aware. The former Oath Keeper, who we previously saw, then was asked again to make some remarks about some different things. And one of the things he said was really impactful. So let's watch.
I think we need to quit mincing words and just talk about truths. And what it was going to be was an armed revolution. I mean, people died that day. Law enforcement officers died this day. There was a gallows set up in front of the Capitol. This could have been the spark that started a new civil war, and no one would have won there. That would have been good for no one.
Again, he's exactly right. And finally, that same witness, that former Oath Keeper, gave a stark warning, informed by his time within these violent and dangerous organizations that look up to Trump. Informed by that experience, he gives a warning about how threatened America is right now by these radical groups who follow Trump's words.
I think we've gotten exceedingly lucky that more bloodshed did not happen, because the potential has been there from the start. And we got very lucky that the loss of life was, and as tragic as it is, that we saw on January 6th, the potential was so much more. Again, all we have to look at is the iconic images of that day with the gallows set up for Mike Pence, for the Vice President of the United States. You know, and I do fear for this next election cycle, because who knows what that might bring. If a president that's willing to try to instill and encourage to whip up a civil war amongst his followers using lies and deceit and snake oil, and regardless of the human impact, what else is he going to do if he gets elected again? All bets are off at that point. And that's a scary notion. I have 3 daughters. I have a granddaughter. And I fear for the world that they will inherit if we do not start holding these people to account.
A great message. And I think it means something coming from someone who knows the threat that these groups pose, because he saw it. He was within it. He had to leave because he saw how disgusting and vile these right-wing white supremacist organizations are that want to do a lot of damage in this country. And if we don't hold the top dog accountable, Donald Trump, of all of these groups who follow him closely and who are loyal to him, then we are threatening our own future. And that is an important and stark warning for our country. So I do encourage you to watch the full thing yourself. We'll be going over in a future segment the wild meeting that was depicted in these hearings that happened at the White House. Almost escalated to the point of physical confrontations between different White House members and different Trump allies based on how much they disagreed on how Trump should proceed. So really, really crazy stuff to go over in that segment. Make sure to check it out, and make sure to check me out on Twitter at Luke P. Beasley. And I'll see you with much more on this in that future segment. Whew. Crazy stuff, guys. What the heck? Oh my goodness. Thank you so much to The Whole World is Insane for the super chat. You're amazing. You're doing a great job breaking down the news. We appreciate you, sir. Thank you. That is so kind. You're amazing. We have a lot more to go through, guys. Oh, crazy stuff. Crazy, crazy stuff. I don't know what to do with myself. I know that was a long segment, but there was just so much to go through with it. Because I am short on time, I'm going to go ahead and start our next story. Just jump right into it. But, of course, feel free to talk in the chat, and I will check it after the story. The 7th January 6th public hearings, led by the January 6th Select Committee, happened, and we went over in a previous segment most of the highlights of that. But I wanted to do a whole separate segment on just one part of it that they talked about, which was an insane meeting that took place in the White House before January 6th between the reasonable-ish Trump allies and the super wacky Trump allies. So I honestly can't break this meeting down better for you than the January 6 hearings did. So for this story, we're just going to play the compilation that they played. I took some things out of it to try to shorten it a little bit, but they depicted it perfectly with testimony from all these different people kind of smushing together to tell this wild story of how a very heated confrontation happened when the wacko Trump allies snuck in pretty much to the White House. I mean, they got the ability to go in, but tried to keep it off the record so that the less wacky Trump staff members wouldn't find out about it and wouldn't stop Trump from listening to the ideas these people had. Of course, I'm referring to Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, and all of those wacky people you're aware of. So again, I'll just be reacting to this wild compilation they put together that describes one of the most insane stories we've heard out of these hearings. Let's take a look.
So let's return to that meeting at the White House on the evening of December 18. That night, a group showed up at the White House, including Sidney Powell, retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, and former Overstock.com CEO Patrick Byrne. After gaining access to the building from a junior White House staffer, the group made their way to the Oval Office. They were able to speak with the president.
So again, they're trying to get into the White House and talk to the president without the rest of the White House staff finding out, because they know, and again, I use the word reasonable because they're not reasonable people generally, the Trump staff members, but compared to the Sidney Powells and the Michael Flynns, they're a little bit more reasonable. And so Sidney Powell, Michael Flynn, and the Overstock CEO or whatever realized if the staff found out about this, they wouldn't allow this meeting to happen, or they would come in and intervene and give the actual facts of the situation to Trump instead of just allowing us to spew our lies.
By himself for some time until White House officials learned of the meeting. What ensued was a heated and profane clash between this group and President Trump's White House advisors, who traded personal insults, accusations of disloyalty to the president, and even challenges to physically fight. The meeting was...
Guys, what is happening? Picture Sidney Powell, Michael Flynn, and the Overstock CEO screaming at other Trump staff members, including Pat Cipollone, and going, "You want to fight?" That's crazy.
Last over 6 hours, beginning here in the Oval Office. Moving around the
for 6 hours, debating whether or not we should overthrow democracy.
West Wing, and many hours later, ending up in the president's private residence. The Select Committee has spoken with 6 of the participants, as well as staffers who could hear the screaming from outside the Oval Office. What took place next is best told in their own words, as you will see from this video.
Did you believe that it was going to work, that you were going to be able to get to see the president without...
Guys, they're interviewing Sidney Powell. She is so Looney Tunes.
Without an appointment?
I had no idea.
In fact, you did get to see the president without an appointment.
We did.
How much time did you have alone with the president? And I say alone.
So usually, if you want to meet with the president of the United States, you have to go through his staff, you have to get an appointment. So they're asking, did you expect to get that appointment? Oh, sorry, did you expect to meet with him even without an appointment? Because that's what ended up happening.
You had other people with you, but
Right.
from his aides before the crowd came running.
Probably no more than 10 or 15 minutes.
Was in that...
I bet Pat Cipollone set a new land speed record.
I got a call.
So Mike Flynn and that other dude went to the White House, met with Trump, trying to give him all these theories before the staff found out about the meeting. Within 10 to 15 minutes, they found out and tried to intervene.
Either from Molly or Hirschman that I need to get to the Oval Office.
So that was the first point that I had recognized. Okay, there was nobody in there from the White House. Mark's gone. What's going on right now?
I opened the door and I walked in. I saw General Flynn. I saw Sidney Powell sitting there. I was not happy to see the people who were in the Oval Office.
Explain why.
Well, again, I don't think they were providing. Well, first of all, the overstock person, I've never knew who this guy was.
So Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, who actually works for Trump, walks in and sees all these people who aren't even members of the White House staff meeting with Trump, and he knows why they're there, to give Trump false theories for why he should overthrow democracy. And so Pat Cipollone is upset, and he doesn't even know who one of the people is who's sitting there.
Actually, the first thing I did, I walked in, I looked at him, and I said, "Who are you?" And he told me. I don't think any of these people were providing the president with good advice. And so I didn't understand how they had gotten in.
In the short period of time that you had with the president, did he seem receptive to the presentation that you were making?
He was very interested in hearing particularly about the system.
Okay, for our podcast listeners, Sidney Powell's responding to this question. She's holding up a Dr. Pepper like next to her face as if she's going to finish her sentence and then take a drink of it. And you'll see when it goes silent for our podcast listeners, just picture her taking a big gulp of her Dr. Pepper, because that's what happens. It's so awkward.
The finding and the terms of 13848 that apparently nobody else had bothered to inform him of.
What is
I was
happening?
asking, like, you're claiming the Democrats were working with Hugo Chavez, Venezuelans, and whomever else. And at one point, General Flynn took out...
To be clear, the theory was not that they were working with Hugo Chavez. It was that they were using fraudulent election systems that Hugo Chavez developed back when he was alive. To be fair to the conspiracy theorists, that was their actual conspiracy. It wasn't that Hugo Chavez was alive or something.
a diagram that supposedly showed IP addresses all over the world, and who was communicating with whom via the machines, and some comment about like Nest thermostats being hooked up to the internet.
So it's been reported that during this meeting, Powell talked about Dominion voting machines and made various election fraud claims that involve foreign countries.
So for our podcast listeners, they're now talking to Mike Flynn, and he's just going to plead the fifth after they ask this question.
Which is Venezuela, Iran, and China. Is that accurate?
Fifth.
Do you recall whether he raised to Ms. Powell the fact that she and the campaign had lost all of the 60 cases that they had brought in litigation?
Yes, he raised that.
And what was the response?
I don't remember what she said.
So then Pat Cipollone is asked, was it brought up that they had lost 60 court cases? And he says it was brought up, but then, as he'll describe here, they just kind of jibber-jabbered around answering that question.
I don't think it was a good response.
Cipollone and Hirschman and whoever the other guy was showed nothing but contempt and disdain of the president.
Yeah, I remember the three of them were really sort of forcefully attacking me verbally. Derek, and we were pushing back, and we were asking one simple question as a general matter. Where is the evidence?
Pat Cipollone and the other, again, somewhat more reasonable Trump staffers were asking the wackos, Mike Flynn, the Overstock CEO dude, and Sidney Powell, we have one question for you. Where's the evidence?
So,
What response did you get when you asked Ms. Powell and her colleagues, where's the
a variety of responses based on my current recollection, including, can't believe you would say something like, things like this, like, what do you mean, where's the evidence? You should know, and things like that, or, a disregard, I would say, a general disregard for the importance of actually backing up what you say with facts.
So that's a classic technique. When you don't have evidence, you then just directly question the person right on back. So if they say, okay, you're making wild claims, where's the evidence? You go, how dare you ask me that? How could you not see all the evidence already? How could you question that Trump would have ever lost this question that he won the election? And you directly just question their loyalty and their own knowledge of the situation instead of answering the question of why you haven't provided any evidence.
And, then there was discussion of, well, we don't have it now, but we will have it or whatever.
That's another one. We don't have the evidence now, but we got it. We just haven't, brought it yet and showed it to you.
I mean, if it had been me sitting in his chair, I
So I know y'all probably know this, but podcast listeners, that's the voice of Sidney Powell every time it cuts to that.
would have fired all of them that night and had them escorted out of the building.
Derek and I both challenged what she was saying. And she says, well, the judges are corrupt. And I was like, everyone? Every single case that you've done in the country you guys lost, every one of them is corrupt? Even the ones we appointed? And I'm being nice. I was much more harsh to her. I think that
the question we've all been asking. All right, you keep saying that you have this evidence and the election was stolen. So why didn't any judges rule in your favor if you had all that evidence? And her response is they're all corrupt. And he goes, every single one, even the ones that Trump appointed, that our administration appointed. And it's like, yeah, sure, if that fits into our narrative.
it got to the point where the screaming was completely out there. I mean, you get people walk in, it was late at night, it had been a long day. And what they were proposing, I thought was nuts.
I'm gonna categorically
Now it's Rudy Giuliani reflecting on this night.
describe it as, you guys are not tough enough. Or maybe I put it another way, you're a bunch of pussies.
So instead of answering for why they don't have evidence, Rudy just says, you're a bunch of P words. Like, really?
Excuse the expression, but I'm almost certain the word was used.
Flynn screamed at me that I was a quitter and everything, kept on standing up and turning around and screaming at me.
Again, it's classic. If someone says, listen, we're on your team, but do you have any evidence for the claims that you're making? Because if not, we can't support this. And instead of answering that question directly, you just go, you're a quitter. You're not loyal enough to the president. You must hate the president. You're a little P word, all those things. You're weak. And that's how you respond instead of giving an honest answer.
And at a certain point, I had it with him. So I yelled back. I had to come over. Or sit your effing ass back down.
So he yells at one of the wackos, I've had it with you. Either come over here or sit your butt down. That's fighting words right there. They're about to get in a physical confrontation, baby.
The president and the White House team went upstairs.
Okay, side note, Rudy, clear your throat or get a drink of water or something. The president and the White.
To the residents, but to the public part of the residence, the big parlor where you can have meetings in the conference room.
Oval? They call that the yellow oval?
Yes, exactly, the yellow Oval Office. I always called it the upper. And I'm not exactly sure where the Sydney group went. I think maybe the Roosevelt room. And I stayed in the cabinet room, which is kind of cool. I really like that. All by myself.
So, guys, Rudy Giuliani's response to, hey, you remember that meeting where you were on the side of overthrowing democracy and overturning a free and fair election? What is your memory of that wild meeting? And he's like, I was calling people P words, and then it was cool because we went to the White House residence and I got to stay in my own room. It was such a fun slumber party. Like, really? That's how you're going to respond to this? And also, why is Trump having these people over for a sleepover? That's crazy. Hey guys, I'm getting tired. Let's keep working on our plot to overturn the election results in the morning. We can do it over coffee. Like, wow. So that was one of the most movie-like, wild, comedic skit-like stories about what was going on in the lead up to January 6th and the efforts by the wackos within Trump's administration, the maximum wackos who were trying to convince Trump to stick with his lies and attempt to overthrow our democratic process. Sheesh. I say to you. Thank you so much to Z King. You're amazing. He said, he sent in a super chat saying, I thought Rudy G was going to croak at some point. He sounded like a frog in this hearing. Yeah, his voice sounded super weird. Thank you again for that super chat. Crazy stuff. We're just like getting used to absolute insanity all the time in this country. We have another great story we're about to dive into, so stick with me. I just want to check in on the comments. Great to have all these familiar usernames in the chat. Love you guys. All right, we're just flying through the news today. So much. Holy smokes. Over the last few months, it has been kind of a given in the political conversations that are prevalent that Democrats are going to get smushed in the midterms, and Republicans are going to obliterate them, take the House, maybe take the Senate, one or the other, or both. And that was kind of what everyone assumed. Many reasons for that. Biden's unpopularity, the economic conditions that are very much contributing to that, the natural swing that tends to happen when a president wins, then the House and Senate usually shift the other direction. But it looks like, due to all of the things that are going against the Republicans right now, Democrats might have a fighting chance in, if not having a massive win midterm. Obviously that's not going to happen, but maybe just holding in there and not losing both chambers, maybe not losing either. That's the hope, and at least we're headed in that direction. Polling wise, I still put it at way better odds that Republicans do win a lot during the midterms, but it's good political tides shifting in the direction that we want them to. And a lot of that is due to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. We saw a shift in the polls. All of these mass shootings where Republicans are not willing to act, and the January 6th hearings showing that the leader of the Republican Party, if not currently in power, definitely still in influence and rhetorical authority, Donald Trump, attempted to overturn the election results in 2020. And so those things combined are causing a situation where Democrats are somehow rising in the polls, even though all of the underlying variables that usually play into a midterm are not going in their favor. So here is a breakdown of multiple different pollsters. You can see that they mark after the Dobbs decision. So after Roe v. Wade was overturned, you saw in every one of these polling companies, except for one of them, Democrats increased their polling after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. They improved and got better chances of winning in these generic 2022 breakdowns. The article that laid out this poll reads, quote, notably, of the 8 polls taken since the Dobbs opinion was released, that's the overturning of Roe v. Wade, 7 found that Democratic support increased over the prior poll. 7 out of the 8. showed that Democratic support increased over the prior poll. 5 found the highest level of Democratic support since the start of 2022. On average, Democratic support was 1.6% higher than was found in the previous poll, and Democrats increased their margin in these polls by 2.3% and actually lead by 0.6%. So depending on the poll now, in some of them in a generic 2022 ballot, which just means you take generally across the country, are you going to vote for the Democratic Party or are you going to vote for the Republican Party when you go and vote in the midterms? Now, depending on the poll you look at, Democrats are winning some of them in those national generic polls, and then Republicans are still winning in some of them as well. So again, that doesn't break down necessarily to all these different races that we're watching, because that's a generic national 2022 poll based on either party, not necessarily every single candidate that we're looking at. That would be a whole long video we would need to do looking at all of the swing districts that are in play here. But comparing it to what we've seen over the past few months, this is really good momentum in the Democratic Party's direction. And of course, we do hope that the American electorate, even though, yes, there's economic conditions that are so upsetting right now, and even though the Democratic Party has not followed through on many of the promises that they made, you would hope they would see the Republican Party appointed justices repealing people's rights, the mass shootings with no action from the Republican Party, and the anti-democratic actions of Trump and many Republicans, as well as many supporters of Donald Trump. You hope that the broader general electorate would be motivated by those factors that we're all aware of now, hopefully, and vote against the Republican Party, if nothing else. Vote for the Democratic Party just to prevent that dangerous party from getting in power. Now, it does come down a lot to the individual races that these campaigns, that these individuals are running. What do I mean by that? If it was Republicans crushing us nationwide, then too bad, so sad. But because it looks like there's a lot of ties in polling of these national generic 2022 ballots, and also there is Democrats winning some, Republicans winning some, that means that either party could make a big impact in the little adjustments they make in any given race, right? Because just based on the polling, which isn't always perfect, it could go either way right now. So that means the individual candidates have to do a really good job on the Democratic side of making it clear why they're the better candidate, making it clear why it's so important that people go out to vote. So this isn't me saying, yay, the 2022 midterms are going to go well. This isn't me saying that the Republican Party isn't still likely to gain a lot, unfortunately, but it is saying we're headed in the right direction, and at least this is a little nugget of positive news that shows maybe Americans are paying attention a little bit to all the damage that the Republican Party is doing lately, and that gives me some level of hope in a pretty tough political climate. What y'all think? Yeah, I think Warnock will win for sure. You think Stacey Abrams will win? That would be awesome. Thank you so much to ZYX who sent in a super chat. Absolutely appreciated. I love the little bravo bitmoji. Patrick's Time says nobody cares about January 6th. That's not true. More than a majority of the country believes that Trump should be criminally charged for January 6th. So clearly, people care about it. But as I like to say, you do you, boo. Believe what you want to believe, my man. You just might be incorrect, though. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our next story. Oh, yeah. We have been covering the fact that it seems like, at least during the daytime Fox News coverage of the January 6th hearings, so why do I say that? The nighttime opinion shows that hosts Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, they are more unhinged than the daytime coverage that tries to be a little bit more newsy and a little bit more official. And so usually, though, they do everything they can to still cover for the Republican Party, to still cover for Donald Trump. And it seems like they're shifting a lot in their willingness to criticize Trump for January 6th, to recognize the groundbreaking information that is coming out of the January 6th hearings, and to give an honest take on all of that. That's good news, because you hope that conservatives watching Fox News, many of them watch it religiously, will slowly start having this information trickled to them through this daytime coverage, and hopefully have their minds changed. And so an example of this is just today, the 7th January 6th hearing happened, and in the coverage during the recess, so during the break of this hearing, the live reaction to it by these Fox News hosts and correspondents was actually pretty reasonable. And again, that's good for any random conservative in rural America or wherever watching Fox News during the day and getting a kind of honest assessment of what's going on. So let's check it out.
And Jonathan, on this, with regard to how Pat Cipollone is sort of carving out the executive privilege, because we have other people who were involved at that level who said that they won't testify because of that. And you can hear him saying, well, I can't talk about what the president said in that meeting, but I'll tell you what I felt overall.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
Yeah, I thought it was actually.
Go ahead, John.
Oh,
oops.
I actually thought it was very interesting because Cipollone was very abridged, very narrow, very careful in his remarks. He specifically at one point said, I don't want to say anything that the president said in these meetings. And so he's trying to hold that line. This did not seem to be a gold mine for the committee. And in fact, there were some reports that Cipollone was not specifically asked about contradictions that he had with other witnesses.
So giving some,
but he was,
right-wing appeal, of course, but as you'll see, they do recognize that there's important stuff coming out of the hearings, which is more than you can say for a lot of right-wing media coverage of this.
Trying to keep that careful line. Now, it's still damaging. The account of that meeting in the office is really breathtaking. It's very disturbing. At one point there was a suggestion that there might be fisticuffs. It was almost like Dr. Strangelove and the president saying there's no fighting in the war room. It was just a bizarre moment of you're in the Oval Office and people seem to be actually chest pounding. So this is very disturbing. All of these details.
So of course, if you missed my coverage of that January 6th revelation, there was a meeting between the Sidney Powell, Mike Flynn wackos and the more reasonable Trump staffers, and then Trump. And it got so explosive that people were physically threatening one another and pretending like they were going to get in some physical altercation. That's how heated it got, because the White House staff was asking people like Sidney Powell, what evidence do you have? And they obviously didn't have any, so it got really heated.
Disturb everyone. But the question is, what is trying to be achieved here? Are they trying to show they've got an actual criminal case? Or are they trying to amplify the previous narrative?
And to that point, Andy, where we're going to go now when the committee reconvenes is to see what influence the president's tweets might have had on these far right-wing groups in terms of encouraging them to come down to the...
See, even Fox News, again, designed for conservatives, willing to recognize, hey, we're about to listen to the rest of this hearing where they're going to break down how Trump's tweets affected far-right, terrible groups to plan and execute an attack on the Capitol and on our democratic process. Wow, they're, letting that information even be discussed. It's amazing.
The Capitol, potentially encouraging them to trouble. Now, again, we don't have the benefit of cross-examination here, so we're going to hear a very one-sided version of events here. But is that the link that you expect them to try to make here, that the president in their mind at least, was trying to incite these right-wing groups to...
So again, it's not perfect. It's not how I would cover it. But he's definitely still giving more credence to Trump than I think he deserves. But even recognizing that all of these topics are being discussed, and the one correspondent said, listen, this is damaging stuff, this is disturbing stuff, is really, really interesting and I think impactful for Fox News to be doing and for Fox News to be spending their airtime covering. So a tiny little bit of credit and a tiny little bit of good news. Hopefully some people will be open to learning about what is coming out of these January 6th hearings. Of course, I mean right-wingers specifically, and possibly change their mind on Trump and possibly become a little bit more pro-democracy. Alrighty. What's going on in the chat? Nothing crazy. Hunter Biden gets a free ride. No, he doesn't get a free ride. If you'll notice, I'm not exactly covering anyone's children unless it's relevant. So like if Hunter Biden was working with the Biden administration right now and had some effect on the policy and stuff like that, then yeah, it would be relevant. But right now it's just like he seemed like he used his connection with his father to get a job he didn't really deserve, and I hate that, and that's the way the politics works. And we should get people in there who don't do that, who don't exploit their positions of power or their family's positions of power to get paid way more than they deserve or get jobs that they don't deserve. But there just doesn't seem to be proven or significant evidence of collusion. So that's why it's just like not much of a story. But if there's investigations and it is, then I would definitely cover it. So yeah. Alrighty, let's do our last story right now. As we talk about a lot in the progressive space, there is this insane obsession on the right with trans people. We have to talk all the time about trans people. And one of the interesting things they do is purposefully be ignorant and purposefully not listen. So they'll ask questions as if I'm genuinely curious about what the heck you're saying, but then they don't actually listen to the answer you give, because of course, if you take 2 seconds to try to understand these issues, it's really not that complicated. This was perfectly exemplified in a hearing that Josh Hawley was a part of, where he was asking a professor from Berkeley, if I'm not mistaken, about presumably abortion rights, but it led to the conversation because she kept referring to people who have the capacity to get pregnant, right? So if you use the most inclusive term possible, which you don't always have to, I think it's perfectly fine to say women when talking about abortion rights, because primarily it's women, 99% women who are affected by abortion rights. But directly affected, of course, they can get pregnant. But there are individuals who are trans men, who are non-binary, who also can get pregnant. And so if you use the most inclusive term, you would say people who are able to get pregnant, people with uteruses, whatever, however you want to phrase it. Again, I think it's fine to use women as shorthand because, again, it is primarily women. But when being very, very precise, sometimes you can use the most inclusive term. And so that's what she was doing, and it led to him questioning her about that topic. And she really effectively pushed back and battled with him rhetorically on this in a way that I think is valuable to take a look at.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. Before I want to visit with you, Ms. Meskey, but before I do, I just want to clear one thing up. Professor Bridges, you said several times, you've used a phrase, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by it. You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are...
A great point to start out with, because they act like That's so crazy that you would say something different, but then she's immediately recognizing, listen, not all women have capacity for pregnancy. So this doesn't even affect all women, but then it does affect some people who are trans men, but then they are able to get pregnant, or non-binary and they're able to get pregnant. And so if we're being very precise, we would recognize all the different groups of people. If you want to pretend like that group of people doesn't exist, that's on you. You're just being less detailed and precise with your language, and that's fine, but you don't need to act like it's me being the one who's absurd, is kind of the point she makes.
Capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
I love the way she manages this. Stays calm, but makes her points clear and doesn't apologize for anything. I think a lot of people, when they're questioned about trans issues, possibly because they don't understand it so great, and so then they are worried they're going to say something wrong and get backlash. Like, just learn up on it, and then be confident in what you believe and what is right on this issue, which is to say, primarily it is a women's rights issue. Yeah, absolutely. But there are a small percentage of people who are not women who do have the capacity to get pregnant. Even intersex people who aren't even within this conversation very often, but people who are born in this world, and all the people that you would say have to make the decision, which are on the side of progressives anyways, on all of these issues because we're empirically correct. But doctors, medical experts will look at some babies whenever they come out and identify them as intersex. They're not male or female. And some intersex people can get pregnant, but they're not technically a man or woman, right? So again, it's how precise do you want to be? Again, I think it's perfectly great to say this is a women's rights issue because for the most part it is. And people know what you mean. But if you want to be really, really, really specific, then you would definitely say people who are able to get pregnant. It's not that hard to understand. And what I hate is, as you'll see here, Josh Hawley purposefully is ignorant, willfully ignorant, as he discusses this with her and pretends that he doesn't understand what she's saying when really he's purposefully not understanding what she's saying.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing.
She's so right on this. I would have waited a little longer to drop necessarily transphobic, because right-wingers are always like, they just want to call everyone transphobic. Just explain why he's transphobic. That's my opinion. Explain why he's incorrect without making it seem like you're reverting to just a title. But she actually does a great job of, after dropping that title, of explaining why he's being transphobic, why he's opening up trans people to violence, as she's going to explain. But again, you can see them. He's sitting there with like a hand on his face. Wait, so I don't understand. Who is this? Then what is this in regard to if it's not only women? And it's like, wait. You already understand that the statement abortion rights are a women's rights issue is not technically correct, even if you don't recognize trans people at all, because not all women can get pregnant. Not all women even have any investment in abortion rights very, very directly, as we discuss it in relation to pregnancy, again, because not all women can get pregnant. And so don't act like just because there's a few different small portions of our country who don't technically fall into what we classify as women's rights, but they do have a direct effect. They get directly impacted by abortion rights. Don't act like that's impossible for you to understand.
Recognizing that.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important.
Because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk?
Because of people like you. But I think it's fine to ask. But the reason why it's upsetting and why we feel like you're transphobic now is because we've explained it so many times. And clearly you're not listening. So that shows me that you don't want to listen. You don't want to understand these issues. Because I could explain 2 seconds, and I have time and time again, but conservatives don't want to hear that. They don't want to recognize that all the medical community is in agreement on what it means to be trans and what the best practices are within bounds. There's obviously always questions, but comparing the conservative solution to people who are born into this world with some sort of misalignment between how they feel and how their physical body came in as a gender or as a sex, and then the gender they identify as, and conservative solution to that is like, don't be that and just suffer, and progressive solution to that is, let's get you the help you need so you can feel as good as humanly possible. And so while initially it's totally fine for you to have questions, it's kind of can be a complex topic. We're talking about biological sex versus gender identity, and that's kind of an interesting discussion to have. But we've tried to explain, and people like you, Josh Hawley, who keep pressing on this, clearly just have a disdain for this community, or you know that it will help you politically because your followers have a disdain for this community because they're afraid of what they don't understand. And that seems to be at the core of why you're asking this question, even though the question itself is perfectly fine. Wait, is this not a women's rights issue only? That's a perfectly fine question, if it's not with bad motives, of course.
Talk about it.
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist.
I'm
is
denying that
dangerous.
trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies.
She's great. She's turning it around. I love it.
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get pregnant.
So he goes, wait, I'm denying that trans people exist? Wait, let's think about this. If you recognize trans men exist, then you recognize they're born biologically female, which means most of them would have the capacity to get pregnant, but they would be men because you recognize they exist as trans men. So yeah, if you're saying that's not possible, then you're saying that trans men don't exist. So you're denying the reality of trans people. It's not that hard to understand.
You're denying that trans people exist.
And that leads to violence. Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this? Where
No,
they're told that they're opening up people to violence?
We have a good
by
time in my
questioning?
class. You should join.
Oh, I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot
I
just in
know.
this exchange.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
So good. Sorry. Great job by that professor. She did a really well-structured breakdown of why he was wrong, stayed calm, but made her points aggressively and passionately, and didn't allow him to bully her around, and didn't just say, well, if you don't understand this, then you're transphobic. No, she explained why it was the case that some people who are not women have the capacity to get pregnant, and why they also are affected directly physically by abortion rights, and did it all in a very nice, nicely presented way. All right. Hello, everybody. What's up? Patrick's time says trans men are still female. So yeah, they're biologically female. Yep. But then they present as female, so you would be best suited to in every social and societal way recognize them as being a man. Or sorry, they present as male. They present as male, yeah, as a man. I worded that wrong, but you get the point. All right, I would love to stick around with y'all, but I have to go. Much love. We just crushed that. So much news. Crazy morning. Did the news. Now I have a wonderful night ahead of me. So I love y'all. Have a wonderful evening. Tomorrow I'll try to make a longer stream with more post-show stuff. Obviously, the news today was long, but the post-show stuff will be more extensive.